What is up, YouTube? My name is Eben, and today we are going to take a look at Seismitoad's Poison Trap. This deck runs mainly around Seismitoad EX, but he does have some compelling backup attackers who we'll get into in a second. We run 3 because that should be good enough to definitely gain access to him. We don't really need a 4th in this case. And we're relying on his Quaking Punch, pretty much as always in Seismitoad decks, and that's pretty self-explanatory. It's got 180 HP, and with the Fighting Fury belt, that's 220, which is pretty darn bulky. Now, Poison Trap revolves around the fact that we are running Seismitoad with Ariados, which might seem a little unusual, but we have ways to protect ourselves from poison, and at the same time, we're going to be potentially accessing Dragalge in order to lock our opponents in so that they can't escape from Seismitoad. This can, of course, make Lysander pretty useful, and it can help us rack up that poison damage to increase the offensive presence of Seismitoad EX, which is one of Seismitoad's big problems, is his lack of offensive presence. So we're also going to run 2 Spinnerax to support those 2 Ariados. And we are going to run just a 1-1 line of Scrup and Dragalge. That's really all you need. And yeah, they could get prized potentially, but we have some ways around that, and we can definitely set this guy up with relative ease, and a 1-1 line is more than enough. Because in the early game, we don't really need him. This guy's mostly useful in the mid to late game when his trapping effect is a lot more practical. And it is relevant to mention that he only traps opponents' poisoned Pokemon, and even if your Seismitoad is poisoned or some other mon in your deck is poisoned, you can still retreat it. He does not block your Pokemon. And that's pretty important. Now, as a backup attacker goes for this deck, we've got Sceptile EX, because after all, Seismitoad doesn't particularly care what type of energy he carries, and most of the other Pokemon on the deck don't really care, although it is nice that Ariados does pair with Sceptile so beautifully, and it could theoretically attack. But since we are poisoning people, and we're going to make it to where it's hard for them to get away, Unseen Claw is a very nice backup attack that can 2-hit KO pretty much anything, and can definitely take on some of this deck's more concerning opponents with relative ease. So this guy is definitely your low energy commitment, high damage output backup attacker who also reaches 210 with your Fighting Fury belt, which is pretty nice. Now, we do run 2 Shaman EX just as your basic draw support in this deck. And lastly, we are running 1 copy of Dragalge because decks like, say, Night March and Vespiquen can be pretty problematic for us. So this can be a great way to really put the brakes on for them and give them a somewhat more difficult matchup and give us an opportunity to really land our control and kind of take over and do what we need to do as a control deck. Now, support-wise, we're running 3 copies of Professor Sycamore, and we're going to be running 3 copies of N. Definitely some nice, powerful options, early, mid, and late game. And we're going to be running 1 copy of Pokemon Fan Club. I know that sounds a little crazy, but we've got a fair amount of search, and our idea here is to battle compress this early so that we can Versus Seeker it. And yeah, you may want to some games you may not, and it's pretty much always going to be just a good top deck for you. But because of the way this deck operates, which you'll see in a couple of turns, that in a little while, it'll really actually pay off for you. It's a nice one-of. Perhaps one of the few times you'll want a one-of that card, but yeah. Definitely a want here. We're also running 1 copy of Pokemon Center Lady. This is sort of a backup. We're going to be using a stadium that'll help Seismitoad keep from being poisoned, but when that's not at our access, we do have Pokemon Center Lady, and she also comes with a bonus, of course, of giving a control deck a nice way to heal damage and potentially buy a turn or 2, which is very nice for us, of course. We do also have AZ here. This can pick up all kinds of things, and especially Shaman, as he's an excellent means for us to draw cards. And it can get things like Ariados and Dragalge out of the active slot if they get Lysander, of course. And speaking of the devil, we do run Lysander, and this card can do some pretty heavy duty for us, as we do like to poison trap things with Ariados Dragalge. Now, item-wise, we're running 4 copies of Ultra Ball for all the obvious reasons. We definitely want to search out our evolutions, and of course it plays well with Shaman. And we're going to be running a pretty obvious 4 Versus Seekers as well. And we're running 2 Battle Compressors. Just 2, because all we really want to compress for the most part, and I emphasize that, I stress that pretty heavily, for the most part what we're going to want to be dunking is a lot of our supporters. But we are actually running Puzzle of Time. So this card can do some pretty amazing utility, and in many ways can function like a computer search or even a double computer search for us in combination with Puzzle of Time if we really want to. So that card has a fair amount of utility for us that a lot of people probably wouldn't expect, kind of looking at the card by itself. And we're running 4 copies of Trainer's Mail to thin the deck really quickly. It plays well with Shaman, and yes, just to kind of increase our consistency, and it is that important that we are running 4. Now, speaking of things we're running 4 of, again, we're running 4 copies of Fighting Fury Belt. It's an easy card to dump out of our hand, and we want our EXs to be very hard for our opponents to break. So that is definitely the option for us, as well as with many other decks too. But yeah, still definitely going to be a 4 for us. And we are, as I mentioned before, running 4 copies of Puzzle of Time. This can really help us because we got enough 1-ofs and 2-ofs and things like that, that while normally it's not a problem under the right circumstances, it could be. And to keep that from being game-breaking for us, Puzzle Time is there to basically fix any particular bad situation we get into. And it can definitely help our consistency and the ability to retrieve things like double colorless energy. I mean, this card is pretty darn powerful in this deck, to be sure. Now, here comes the juicy part. We are running 3 copies of Chaos Tower. This new stadium, you flip it to where there's sort of the dark side, which prevents sleep and paralysis on that side, and there's the light side up here, which prevents poison and confusion. So basically, you're going to play this stadium down on the light side for yourself, and you don't really care if your opponent can't be slept or paralyzed anyway, because it's not really going to matter. And the idea is that this just blocks your opponent completely from being able to poison you, but more particularly, it blocks you from poisoning you, so that you can continually use your Ariados every turn that you need to, and your Seismitoad can blithely ignore it and keep Quaking Punching, and your opponents can't get away from your Dragalge. Now, like I say, when that stadium's not actually firing off for us, we can certainly access our Pokemon Center Lady when needed as well, or just rely on Sceptile. Our final item is going to be our town map. We just have a few too many things that we would want to fish out of our prizes in the event that we do prize them. It's just a little too much to not run the town map, and of course town map plays well with Shaman too, so that warrants mentioning. And our energies are pretty cut and dried. We run 4 double colorless energies because Seismitoad, and that's enough reason right there. And our basic energies, we're going to run 5 grass energies just because we really don't want to drop a double colorless energy onto our Sceptile EXs if we don't have to get his attack off. We'd rather just drop 2 grass. So that's more or less the reason why we were running 5 of these. And that is the deck. It is a pretty gosh darn good one. Definitely give it a try. Poison trapping is a pretty fun way to go. Like I say, try it with your friends. This list may be subject to change. Your specific metagame can have a heavy impact on what specific cards you can tailor into it. So definitely do a little looking into that before you actually end up taking the deck to a tournament or anything like that. But I think I've said enough, so I'm going to get the heck out of here. And until next time, like, comment, subscribe, check me out on Twitter. Link is below as always, and I will see you next time.